Hello and welcome back to the Long Island Railroad Montauk branch. Today, as threatened, I am going to show you how to paint figures, and I've selected these two. These are Prizer figures, I guess that's how you pronounce it, from this set right here that I got at a train show for, as you can see, 15 bucks. These are really nice figures. The little machines that come with it and all that, the details are very nice. The problem is they're German and they have a distressing tendency to be dressed in uniform looking clothing, like this guy right here. I'm not sure he'd be appropriate for my layout. Some of these others, they're all wearing peaked caps, and some of them look like they're wearing the German field caps, Feldschmutzes, or whatever they're called. Yeah, so I wish I'd looked closer at the package before I bought it, but still, they're nice figures. So we're going to paint these guys. And the reason I'm doing this is because there was an article in Model Railroader a few months ago by Lou Sassi showing how he painted figures. And I saw that and I said, you know, that's fine. Nothing against Lou, he's great. He's practically responsible for half of Model Railroader magazine's content. But there are other ways to paint figures that might be more useful. So I'm going to demonstrate that. Now, you might be asking, what qualifies this guy to tell me how to paint figures? Well, I'll show you. After I started as a model railroader, as I grew up and went to high school, I met some friends who were military wargamers. So I kind of left model railroading and got into military figures. And basically that was my hobby for 40 years. And this is just a fraction of the figures that I have painted. Sorry, the light over here is kind of dim, but here are some more figures. I mainly do British colonial, but I have a significant number of other kinds of figures. I also have a whole bunch of 15 millimeter figures. These are what are called 25s or 28 millimeter figures. I have 15s that I don't have on display. They're all in little boxes. And I also have some micro armor that's not on display. They're in boxes. And I am not a prolific painter. There's plenty of people who have painted far more figures than I have in the same time. However, I am a pretty good figure painter. if I am honking my own horn there. I'm not a diorama figure painter, so I'm not diorama quality, but for wargame quality, I'm pretty good. I also don't like the way some diorama figures are painted anyway, so I paint them my way, and that's what I do. And here's a close-up of some of the most recent figures I painted. These are War of the Spanish Succession era figures. Why? Good question. But these are the most recent figures I've painted. So naturally, they're the culmination of all my years of skill. And here's some pirates for them to fight. Okay. Whoops, focus. All right, enough showing off. I hope I've demonstrated that I have some skill in painting figures. All right, back to the task at hand. These figures, I've already done some work on them. I've scraped some of the mold lines off, well, all the mold lines that I could find at least. And when you're doing that, use a knife, use an X-Acto knife, don't use a file. Files are too clumsy. You'll end up scraping off a lot of the detail too. So I just use a knife. You can see this guy still needs to have his arms glued on, so we'll take care of that. So to glue the arms on, I use thick super glue because it gives you a little working time and it doesn't run all over the place. And always use Instaset because it makes it an immediate, well, almost immediate bond. And you can just drip it on just like that. instead of using the sprayer, which gets it everywhere. Now for the second arm, I failed to get it in place before the glue set. So I scraped off the old glue and started over. And I got it on correctly the second time. You can see right here, I put glue on the arm and put the Insuset on his shoulder so that as soon as they touched, the bond was formed. And all that means is that if you don't get it right the first time, it's going to take a little effort to get it apart and try again. But luckily it worked fine the first time. And now I'm going to go outside and prime the figures. You don't need to see that, it's boring. What I'm going to do, first of all, see, I like to use these tweezers, self-clamping tweezers to hold on to figures. If it had a base, I would probably glue it to a little dowel that I have, my little painting dowels here that I will glue figures to the top of. If I've got a whole bunch of them, I've got a whole bunch of dowels. But for this, I'll just use these tweezers. Yeah, there we go. This is hard to do. Okay, this figure, I'm going to use a technique called Preshading, where I'm going to take this paint and get it in front of the camera here. This is also hard to do. Damn, this is just dark chocolate, deco art, craft paint. I used craft paint to paint my figures for decades. And just going to take some of it on the brush with some water and just slather it on. So I just cover the figure with a nice thick coat of the brown and try to get a good grip on the figure with the tweezers and not drop it several times like I did. Okay, and on this figure, second figure, we're going to do post shading. So we're just going to start in painting him right away. And first, okay, this isn't going to surprise anyone, I hope, but when you're painting figures, you start with the inside layer first. So in this case, it's flesh. Flesh is the furthest inside of all the layers. I had to start over because it was becoming impossible for me to do this with the camera and the angle that it was in before. Here I switched to a much finer point 10-aught brush, which I recommend everyone have if they're going to do detail work. I've decided I'm going to paint this guy. His pants are going to be whatever color this is, Midnight Garden. Why? I don't know. I just happen to pick it. And his smock is going to be slate gray. So let's get that done. Now this is optional, but I'm going to do this because it's what I've done for a long time on figures, and I'm going to add a little highlight to the back of his hands and some of the higher areas of his face. Now I didn't do it very well on this figure, but it looks better in real life than it does on camera. I'm also going to paint his eyes, which is something also you don't have to do. It requires a steady hand and a very fine brush. So here's a little white for his eyeballs. And when you paint the pupils, you don't put a dot in the middle of the eye. Put a vertical line from the top to the bottom. Otherwise it looks like he's constantly surprised. And you'll see that on the first eyeball that I do, the first pupil, I give him the surprised look, but I fix it later by adding some eyebrows. So eyebrows are a good way to give your figures expressions. So I guess that's good enough. I mean, it's not the best job in the world, but you know, it's there. At least I made the effort. Right now I'm just going to paint the hair. One of the hardest things to do on figures is paint hair, because it's usually not very well modeled, for one. And if you want to try to put sideburns in, that can be a pain, because sometimes you can't even tell where the ears are supposed to be. And hair color, never try to paint blonde hair. It will never look right. Just stick with browns and blacks. Last but not least is we're going to paint his smock slash jacket slash shirt, whatever it is. We're painting it slate gray, like I said. Now the color. All right, the figure is all dry. Now we're going to demonstrate why this is called post shading, because we shade after we're all done painting it, as opposed to before we paint it. Now I'm going to use this stuff called Quick Shade from Army Painter. I'm going to use it because I have it. I'm not going to recommend that you go out and buy some because it's hideously expensive. And it's oil-based, and it also leaves a glossy coat. So that means it takes a while to dry, and you have to come back and put some dull coat on it when you're done. So it's kind of a pain, but it does work really well. So they recommend that you just dip the figure into the can, but I'm not going to do that because that's a little more shade than I want to apply to this figure. So let me zoom in a little bit. And I'm just going to take my brush and dip it in the shade and paint it on. So you just basically, I won't say slather, but paint on a good layer over the entire figure. And then takes a while to dry, and then hit it with a layer of dull. I use Chester's dull coat, paint on, not spray on. And it ends up looking pretty good. And here's the other figure. He actually looks almost okay just as he is, right? Well, not really, but well, just watch. See what we do with him. I'm going to start the same way we did the other one, which is painting all the flesh. All right, so much for the flesh. Now the secret to this technique is that other than the flesh, Everything else that we paint is going to be dry brushed. We're going to start with his overalls, which I'm going to paint gray. I'm going to do the opposite of the other figure. I'm going to paint the underside gray and the coat blue. So we just got some, this color is called hippo gray. It's a dark gray. It's going to just dry brush it on carefully. The secret to this technique, or the advantage rather to this technique, is that you don't have to be perfect. You can miss a bunch of spots and it doesn't matter, because that's why we pre-shaded it. You've already got a color there, and when you see the completed product, it'll all be blended in such that it actually looks really realistic. So just keep watching and you see what I mean. So off camera, I did the highlights to his face and gave him some eyeballs. I think he came out a little bit better than the other guy. He's kind of cross-eyed, but who's going to notice? So the next step is to take a slightly lighter shade of whatever the main color is and do more dry brushing to give the figure more highlights. Now we're going to do this for both the gray and the green here. The final step is we're going to take a nice chisel brush and very lightly dry brush a coat of white over the entire figure to catch the very top, the very highlights. And you could do this to the other figure as well, but I chose not to because I'm capricious. There you have it, a couple of simple yet effective techniques for painting figures. To recap, the figure on the left was painted using the post-shading technique, wherein the colors were painted on solid, details were added that are optional, and then the figure was shaded with the commercially available product from Armor Painter called Quick Shade. And you could use other colors or other products available should they exist, or just use a wash of dark brown. I have already gone ahead and painted him with the dull coat, the Paint On Tester's dull coat. The figure on the right was painted using the pre-shade technique, wherein the figure, after being primed, is coated with a dark wash, and then the colors of the clothing are dry brushed on in successive layers of lighter colors, and with a final coat of highlight of white. And that just about does it. I hope you learned something. It's up to you to decide which technique you like better. Maybe you'll try both. Maybe you'll just ignore it. Who cares? Thanks for watching, and I'll leave you with this picture of my three babies hunting a lizard out on the porch. See you later.